In the quiet mist of Pine Hollow, where whispers travel faster than truth, a loyal German shepherd named Ranger froze at the edge of a clearing, his eyes locked on something no one else could see. Beside him, Deputy Carla Finch, a woman who'd learned to trust her instincts as much as her badge, felt her heart catch. There, slumped against a gnarled oak, was an old man, gray hair matted, wrists bound, his faded 101st Airborne patch, the only clue to a life of courage, now shrouded in silence. What Ranger did next didn't just uncover a forgotten hero. It stirred a town to remember the promises they'd broken and the ones they'd fight to keep. The German shepherd halted abruptly at the edge of the tree line, his tail rigid, ears pricked. Deputy Carla Finch, trailing behind, felt a chill as she followed his gaze. There, slumped against a gnarled oak, half-shrouded in damp leaves and pine needles, was an elderly man. His wrists were cruelly bound behind him, his lips parched and cracked, his face etched with exhaustion. He made no sound, offered no name, but a single faded patch on his sleeve, 101st Airborne Division, spoke volumes. What unfolded next, spurred by the dog's unwavering instinct, silenced the town's murmurs and stirred its collective memory. The morning mist clung low to the pine-strewn forest floor, casting an ethereal veil over the clearing. Deputy Carla Finch tugged gently at Ranger's leash, but the German shepherd stood resolute, his nose lifted, tail a straight line. "Ranger," she murmured, her voice soft in the stillness. He didn't bark, didn't flinch, but took a deliberate step forward, then another, before freezing again. Carla's eyes followed his line of sight, and her breath caught. At the base of a half-fallen oak, partially obscured by sodden foliage, sat a man. His gray hair was matted to his scalp, his cheeks hollow, his hands tethered tightly behind the trunk. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was gone. Then a faint rise of his chest, a subtle quiver of his lips, proved otherwise. Carla dropped to her knees, her radio crackling as she fumbled for it. "Sheriff, I've got a live male, elderly, Caucasian, restrained near mile marker 12. Send EMS now, possible hypothermia." She shrugged off her jacket, draping it over his frail shoulders. He didn't acknowledge her, his gaze fixed on some distant point, eyes glassy and unseeing. As she checked for injuries, her fingers brushed against the faded patch on his sleeve. 101st Airborne Division. Her heart stuttered. This man, broken and mute, was a veteran, a soldier who'd seen battles she could only imagine. Sheriff Ray Hammond arrived within 15 minutes, his cruiser kicking up gravel. By then, EMTs were slicing through the zip ties, easing the man onto a stretcher. He remained silent, clutching Carla's jacket as if it were a lifeline. "Any ID?" Ray asked, his voice gruff. "Nothing," Carla replied, handing him the patch, now detached from the coat. Ray cradled it in his palm, his expression unreadable. Ranger, still posted nearby, kept his eyes locked on the spot where the man had been found, as if guarding a secret. His stillness wasn't just alertness. It felt personal, like he sensed the weight of the wrong done here. By 9:00 a.m., whispers had spread through Pine Hollow like wildfire. The EMTs hadn't even cleared the forest's edge before the town buzzed with speculation. An old man tied up like some criminal. A drifter, maybe. No, he had a military jacket. Back at the station, Sheriff Hammond brushed off two reporters loitering outside. "No name, no statement. Not until we know who he is." Inside, Carla poured herself a cup of bitter coffee, her hands trembling. She couldn't shake the image of the man's eyes, unblinking, vacant, as if he were peering through her into another world. At County General, he was stable but barely responsive, his identity reduced to the patch and the bruises marring his skin. "He didn't wander out there," Carla said, leaning against Ray's office doorframe. "Someone did this to him. It was deliberate." Ray nodded, his jaw tight. In a town where faces were familiar, this man was a ghost. No one recognized him. Not yet. Behind the station, Ranger refused to eat, pacing the kennel restlessly. Each time the back door creaked open, he'd turn toward the woods, his gaze unwavering. "He wants to go back," Carla observed. Ray glanced up from his desk. "Let him." It was Katie, a nurse at County General, who spotted the clue. On the man's left wrist, beneath the grime, was a small, faded tattoo, a date, followed by Harris, Raymond J. She relayed it to the charge nurse who phoned the station. Within the hour, Sheriff Hammond stood in room 214, staring at the man now identified as Raymond Harris. He lay motionless, eyes closed, an IV dripping steadily, a bruise blooming across his temple, scrapes crisscrossing his arms as if he'd been dragged through the underbrush. Ray pulled a chair close. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said, his voice low and steady, "but I'm going to assume you can." He exhaled. "Your name's Raymond Harris. We checked your record. Master Sergeant, 101st Airborne, retired. 2 tours in Vietnam, Bronze Star." No response, not even a flicker. "But that doesn't tell me who did this to you or why." Ray unfolded a yellowed newspaper clipping from his pocket, a photo from a 4th of July parade a decade ago. There was Raymond, ramrod straight in his dress uniform, standing proudly on a float beside the flag. Back then, he was a fixture in Pine Hollow. Respected, known. Back then, he had a home. Ray flipped the clipping over, noting the address. A farmhouse on Lakeview Road. He sent Carla to investigate. The house was a shadow of its former self. Peeling paint, sagging shutters, the mailbox long gone. Inside, dust coated everything. Empty picture frames littered the floor. A couch bore a torn cushion, and in the corner lay a cane, snapped clean in two. Back at the hospital, Raymond stirred, his eyes fluttering open for a fleeting moment. He whispered something, so faint Carla had to lean in. "What did he say?" Ray asked, his voice tight. Carla's eyes glistened. "He said, 'Did Ranger find me?'" The next morning, Ray took Ranger back to the woods. The dog bounded from the cruiser before it fully stopped, needing no leash, no command, just pure instinct. Ray followed, the forest less ominous in daylight, but no less silent. The oak where Raymond had been found still stood, its base encircled by disturbed earth, boot prints and broken branches pressed into the soil. Ranger sniffed the area methodically, then darted east through the underbrush. Ray scrambled to keep pace, his pulse racing. 30 yards deeper, Ranger stopped, paws planted, tail stiff. Ray pushed through the brush and froze. Half buried under pine needles and damp leaves was a small duffel bag. He crouched, unzipping it carefully. Inside, a tin of crackers, a creased military photo of a young Raymond grinning with 2 comrades, a legal envelope, and a single key. Ray opened the envelope with trembling hands. It held a reverse mortgage agreement, dated 2 years prior, bearing Raymond's signature alongside another, Brady Harris. Back at the station, Carla had dug into the records. Brady, Raymond's nephew and sole living relative, had filed for guardianship 6 months ago, moved into the Lakeview property soon after, and then sold it. The house hadn't been lost. It had been stolen. Ray stood in the woods, clutching the photo. On its back in faded ink were the words, "We made it home. That's what matters." Ranger whined softly, nudging the bag's corner. Ray looked down at the dog, his voice a whisper. "You're not just a tracker, boy. You're the only one he trusted to bring him back." Ranger's tail wagged once, and Ray's resolve hardened. The woods were still, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. Deputy Carla Finch moved through the underbrush, her boots crunching softly on the frostbitten leaves. Ranger, her German shepherd, tugged at his leash, nose low, tail stiff. He'd caught something that didn't belong out here. Carla's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady, murmuring to Ranger as they pushed deeper into the forest. Then, there he was, Raymond J. Harris, bound to a tree, his silver hair matted, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the pines. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, just sat there, a man carved from the same stubborn oak he was tied to. Carla's heart sank, a mix of pity and fury swirling in her gut. She radioed for help, her voice tight, and knelt beside him, Ranger pressing close, whining softly. Raymond's hands, calloused from years of war and work, were cold but steady. Whoever did this, she thought, didn't know who they were dealing with. Sheriff Ray Hammond stood at the edge of the Gish Station Cafe, his jaw tight as he watched Brady Harris through the window. Brady sat in a booth, all pressed shirts and polished boots, a Bluetooth blinking in his ear like he was some big city deal maker. The keys to a new Ford gleamed on the table, bought with money that wasn't his. Brady's smile was easy when he saw the sheriff, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff Hammond?" he drawled, leaning back. What brings you here? Ray didn't sit, didn't smile. He slid a folder across the table, the reverse mortgage agreement, stark against the Formica. Found your uncle, he said, voice low. Brady's face flickered, just for a second. Uncle Ray? Didn't even know he was gone. Ray's eyes narrowed. You knew enough to take his house. Brady shrugged, casual as if they were talking about the weather. He wasn't right in the head, hadn't been for years. Said he wanted out. Ray leaned closer, his shadow falling over the table. He also said someone chained him to a tree. Brady's smile vanished. Ray tapped a photo from Raymond's duffel bag, a faded snapshot of a younger Raymond in uniform. Ever serve, Brady? Brady snorted. No offense, Sheriff, but I never saw the point. Ray's voice was steel. Raymond did. 2 tours, saved men, built that house with his own hands. You walked him out of it and left him to die. Brady stood, grabbing the folder. That's a hell of an accusation. Ray didn't move. It's a fact. You didn't just steal from a man. You stole from a soldier. From this town. Brady's eyes darted to the window where a line of motorcycles stretched along the curb, their riders standing silent, watching. Ray's voice was calm but heavy. Give the money back. Sign the house over. Do it quiet. Brady laughed, but it was thin. Or what? Ray nodded toward the bikers. They served with him. They remember? If you don't, I'll let them talk to you. Brady's face paled, and he stepped back. By Friday, the house on Lakeview Road was Raymond's again. Brady didn't fight, didn't show his face. Word was he'd left town before the paperwork was dry. No apologies, no trace. The town didn't celebrate, but it didn't forget. A flyer appeared on the church bulletin board that Sunday, simple and unsigned. Community cleanup, Lakeview House, Saturday, 8 a.m. No fanfare, just a call to action. By dawn, the driveway was packed. Neighbors, some who hadn't spoken to Raymond in years, showed up with rakes, paint cans, and quiet determination. Teenagers hauled out broken furniture, sorting what could be salvaged. A man from the hardware store, Paul, dropped off lumber and tools, his note brief, for Raymond. Paul, 2nd Battalion 69. Raymond sat on the porch, frail but upright, his eyes tracking the work. Ranger sprawled at his feet, head on paws, as if he'd never left. Katie, the nurse who'd tended to Raymond since his first night at County General, knelt beside him with a steaming mug of tea. You okay with all this? She asked, her voice soft. Raymond's gaze swept the lawn, kids painting the porch swing, a boy patching the roof. Didn't think anyone cared, he murmured. Katie smiled. They didn't, but they do now. Raymond reached into his flannel pocket, pulling out that same photo from the duffel bag. He flipped it over, scribbled something on the back, and handed it to her. What's this? She asked. A note, he said, in case I forget again. She read it, her throat tightening. Not forgotten. Just quiet. Down the road, someone fired up a grill. Chairs appeared, dragged from truck beds. It wasn't a party, but it was something being rebuilt piece by piece. Sheriff Hammond pulled up just as the sun dipped low, his cruiser kicking up dust. He walked over, his boots heavy on the gravel. Ready for what's next? He asked Raymond. The old man's lips curved, just a hint of a smile. Already had the hard part, he said. Now I just want to live where my boots fit the floor. The town didn't do big ceremonies, but when they did, they were humble. No banners, no speeches. This one was different, held on a Sunday afternoon under the sprawling oak behind the courthouse, where they honored the fallen every Memorial Day. No flags at half-mast this time, just folding chairs and quiet faces. Raymond sat in the front row, clean-shaven, his old boots polished. Ranger sat beside, vest crisp, badge glinting. Sheriff Hammond stepped to the mic, his voice steady. Some men don't ask to be remembered, he said. They don't wave their hands or chase glory. They do their duty, and sometimes we lose them in the noise. He looked at Raymond. We forgot someone. We're here to say we won't again. He handed Raymond a wooden plaque, simple but heavy. Raymond J. Harris, 101st Airborne Division. Not forgotten, just quiet. The crowd stood, no clapping, just standing. One by one they came forward. Some shook his hand, some nodded, others left tokens. A service patch, a photo, a folded flag. Then it was Ranger's turn. Deputy Carla stepped up, kneeling. She opened a small box, revealing a canine medallion. "For service beyond duty," she read, "and loyalty that never wavered." Ranger didn't know the words, but as the crowd bowed their heads, he rested his muzzle on Raymond's boot, gentle and sure. That night, the porch light at Lakeview House glowed, not because someone forgot to turn it off, but because someone had finally come home. Raymond sat in his father's old rocking chair, the wood creaking under his weight, familiar as a heartbeat. Ranger lay at the steps, no vest, no badge, just a dick with tired eyes and a full belly. The town was quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the kind that holds space, that respects. Katie stopped by at dusk, leaving a paper bag on the porch. Soup, bread, a note in her neat handwriting. "Same recipe your mama used. You're not alone anymore." Raymond chuckled, a low, warm sound. He picked up the bag, settled back, and looked at the stars. No speeches, no parades, just a man, a D, and a house that fit his boots again. Raymond J. Harris sat quietly, his weathered hands resting on the arms of an old wooden chair that groaned softly under his weight. The air around him carried the faint scent of pine and earth, a reminder of the forest where he'd been found just days before, bound to a tree like some forgotten relic of a war long past. His eyes, clouded with age and memory, stared out into the distance, seeing not the present, but fragments of a life spent in service. Parachutes blooming against a smoky sky, the crack of gunfire, the weight of duty that never quite lifted. The 101st Airborne Division had shaped him, hardened him, and now, in his twilight years, it was the only thing that still felt real. He hadn't spoken much since they'd brought him back to town, his voice as distant as the man he'd once been. But his silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with stories he'd never told, burdens he'd carried alone. Beside him, Ranger, the German shepherd who'd found him, lay curled at his feet, his fur still damp from the morning dew. Raymond reached down, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the dog's ears, scratching gently. "You found me, boy," he murmured, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "Found me when I didn't even know I was lost." Ranger's tail gave a single lazy thump against the floor before he drifted back into a contented sleep, his steady breathing a quiet anchor in the room. To Raymond, that dog was more than a hero. He was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, something instinctual and true could still pull you back. It had been Deputy Carla Finch who'd first spotted him, her flashlight cutting through the pre-dawn mist as she and Ranger patrolled the outskirts of town. She'd felt a chill that wasn't from the cold when she saw him. Raymond, his wrists raw from the ropes, his face etched with exhaustion, but eerily calm, as if he'd made peace with being left there. Carla's heart had clenched at the sight, a mix of anger and sorrow rising in her chest. Who could do this to an old man, a veteran no less? She'd knelt beside him, her voice soft but urgent as she called his name, her hands working quickly to free him, while Ranger stood guard, his ears pricked and eyes sharp. Carla had always been driven by a sense of duty, but this was different. This was personal. She didn't know Raymond's story yet, but she felt the weight of it in his silence, and she vowed to see justice done. Sheriff Ray Hammond had taken charge from there, his broad shoulders and steady gaze a reassuring presence in the chaos that followed. He'd stood in the hospital room where they'd taken Raymond, his jaw tight as he listened to the EMTs describe the old man's condition. Dehydrated, bruised, but alive. Ray's resolve hardened with every detail. This wasn't just a case, it was a betrayal of everything he stood for as a sheriff. He'd grown up hearing stories of men like Raymond, heroes who'd faced hell and come back quieter for it. To see one treated like this, tied up, abandoned, lit a fire in him. He'd find who did this, no matter how long it took. His deputies, the townspeople, even the reporters who'd started sniffing around. They all saw the determination in his eyes, the kind that didn't waver. The truth, when it came, was uglier than anyone had expected. Brady Harris, Raymond's own nephew, had orchestrated it all. Greed had twisted him, his heart turned cold by the promise of easy money. He'd tricked Raymond into signing over his home through a reverse mortgage, then left him in the woods to erase the evidence of his betrayal. The house Raymond had built with his own hands, the one filled with memories of a life hard won, was nearly lost to him forever. When Carla heard the news, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles whitened. She thought of Raymond's distant gaze, the way he'd seemed to expect nothing from the world anymore, and it broke her. But it also fueled her. She'd make sure Brady faced the consequences, and she'd do whatever it took to help Raymond reclaim what was his. At County General, where Raymond was recovering, a nurse named Katie became his quiet champion. She'd sit by his bed, her voice warm and gentle, as she talked about small things, the weather, the hospital's terrible coffee, the way the town was rallying around him. Katie saw the flicker of life in his eyes when she spoke, the way his fingers twitched as if reaching for something familiar. She'd bring him extra blankets, sneak him a cookie from the cafeteria, anything to remind him that he wasn't alone. To her, Raymond wasn't just a patient. He was a man who'd given everything and deserved to feel human again. Her kindness was a bridge, coaxing him back from the edge of his own silence. Word of Raymond's ordeal spread fast, carried by reporters and whispered among townspeople. It stirred something in the community, a collective need to right the wrong. Paul, a grizzled veteran who worked at the hardware store, was one of the first to step up. He'd served in a different war, but he knew the look in Raymond's eyes, the one that said you'd seen too much to ever feel at home again. Paul organized a group to restore Raymond's house, hauling lumber and paint, hammering nails under the summer sun. Others joined in, neighbors, strangers, even kids who'd heard the story from their parents. They worked late into the evenings, their laughter and chatter filling the air where silence had once reigned. The house began to take shape again, its walls standing prouder, its windows gleaming with new glass. By the time Raymond was well enough to leave the hospital, the town had given him more than a house. They'd given him a home. He'd been driven back by Carla, who'd insisted on being the one to bring him, with Ranger riding shotgun, his head out the window, tongue flapping in the breeze. When Raymond stepped onto his porch, his boots creaking against the fresh wood, he paused. The wind rustled through the trees, but it didn't sound hollow anymore. It carried the echo of hammers, the warmth of voices, the pulse of a community that had refused to let him fade. He eased himself into the chair, the one they'd placed just for him, and looked out over the yard. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past lift, just a little. Raymond's hand found Ranger's head again, his fingers lingering in the dog's fur. "Guess you're the real hero, huh?" he said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Ranger stirred, his tail thumping once more before he settled back into sleep. The chair creaked as Raymond leaned back, the sound blending with the hum of the world around him. The wind whispered through the pines, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was calling him home.